Под ваши аплодисменты, друзья, give a round of applause for Alex Frolov, General Partner of Target Global, Saul Orbach, Venture Partner with BrightSky Venture and with Starta Capital, and Egor Abramov, CFA, Principal Investment Advisor for Fort Ross Ventures. Gentlemen, I'll leave you up to the discussion, and you have 28 minutes to open it.
Excellent. Guys, thanks everyone for coming today. Thank you very much for coming. Saul, Egor. We have, I suppose, quite an interesting topic today, and we were sharing just before some insights that hopefully would be helpful and also non-trivial. But maybe we can start from the general sort of round of intros about, the funds. What does the fund do? What kind of, investments you make? Just, to set the context.
Sure. Let me start. Yeah, as Alex said, I'm an investment principal for Fort Ross Ventures. It's an international VC fund. We are partnering with Sberbank. Sberbank is our limited partner, among others. And we invest in the US and Israel. Also, Russia is our also focus, but still we don't have a single project from Russia. We have a $200 million fund that is now investing, and 7 projects in the second fund, about 10 projects in the first fund. We invest in B, C, and D round, preferably. It's a companies with like $2 to $5 million revenue for the last 12 months. And we bring the companies to Russia through the partnership with our LPs, including Sberbank, as a large client, large bank. That's our value prop for the top startups in the US and Israel. That's briefly it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Saul?
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, there you go. My name is Saul Orbach. I'm a venture partner with 2 funds. One of them is located here in Moscow, in this building, in fact, Starta Capital. They have an office in New York. They invest primarily in Eastern European companies. And we opened an office in New York that accelerates the companies after they've had traction in Europe. I work with the companies that are in transition from Europe to America. I also work for a company called BrightSky Ventures, located in Paris. We are an early-stage investor primarily in homeland security technologies and solutions. The BrightSky, 2 of the founders there were from Colombia and Latin America. So one of the things that we look for are technologies that not only make sense, but that can be introduced to the Latin American market in addition to whatever other markets they're going after. I happen to be based in Israel, but I work with both of these funds. That's what I do. I've been in the technology startup venture capital world for 30 years now. So I've done things like startups, turnaround work, growth companies, investing. So I think I have a broad, interesting perspective on a lot of things. And I'm really happy to be here and start this panel. I have to admit, I didn't realize I would need sunglasses here to be on the panel, but it's all good. Anyway, this is going to be fun. Let's go.
As a man from Israel, I think you are used to the bright skies and bright lights. No, but I'm really looking forward. I mean, so what you have to say. I know you're also lecturing at the Technion University. So certainly, I mean. So have quite a few interesting insights. I guess from my side briefly, and maybe also a couple of statements just to start this discussion. At Target Global, we are investing in European startups, headquartered in Berlin. We also have offices in Israel, in Tel Aviv, it happens to be, not in Jerusalem, in London, in Moscow, of course, and looking across this region. But really, I think what makes me excited about this topic about partnering with a top investor, why I think it is very important. I think that it's very hard, to underestimate the importance of top investor versus non-top. Because even if you look at the statistics of the returns of the venture capital and private equity funds, in fact, the vast majority of the return goes to those, top, you name it, 5 players, 5% of players, and so on. Why? Well, there are different reasons. One is because, the startups who are really successful, who have, amazing traction, they know they're good. And they are choosing the investor, really. And they are usually preferring to work with a good investor. However, on the other hand, we have seen companies with very similar, business models. For example, in Europe, I can give you an example, from our portfolio. There is a company called, Go Euro, does, multimodal, travel, buses, railways, flights, and there is the similar company called Citymapper in the UK. And the mere fact that the likes of, Battery Ventures and NEA from the Valley were, investors in the Go Euro, I would argue, created the gap in the valuation to their close competitors about, 5 to 10 times. Just because it created a huge signaling effect, and the Goldman Sachs of this world, the DSTs of this world, finally, we had Kleiner Perkins joining round D, not Series A or something. And for the entrepreneurs in the company, it was super big difference in terms of the outcome, in terms of the ownership. So I can only encourage you to try whenever you can to attract those top investors, because the effects on your business eventually could be overarching and far exceeding your initial expectations. Many people say, oh, it's just money, okay, someone is better, someone is not so good, but I think it really makes a difference. And maybe just so to build on what we were discussing before, you mentioned a great practical example about how to get to an investor, top investor like yourself, what is the efficient and maybe not so efficient way?
So we were talking about early stage investors. I think at the later stage, it's a different story. But early stage investors, people in their seed stage and looking for the first rounds. So I mentioned that I get every day a few emails, from people looking to raise funding. People I don't know, people I've never met. And while I applaud their directness and aggressiveness in trying to raise money, and that's what you have to do, I think that fundraising and getting investment is about developing partnerships with people. It's about developing relationships. Because as an investor, the thing that's most important to me is, obviously I want to make sure that I pick the companies that I think can be the most successful of all the companies that I look at, and that's a lot. But I want to also pick the people that I'm going to have a great relationship with. People who I trust, people who I know, people who I'm going to get to know much, much better. So I get emails every day and ask me to invest in companies that I don't know. And although I'm very polite and I never tell people to what I really think, I generally do not pursue those opportunities because I don't know the people. So I think that if you're an early stage company and you're looking for your first investment round, what I advise people is start a year before or 6 months before you need the money and start identifying the investors in your space and start to get to know them. Reach out to them when you don't need money and say, listen, I'm in your space. I think you have I can learn a lot from you. I'd love to be able to get together and have a cup of coffee and just chat. Or go to the events where investors are, like this one. People are coming here, come here and meet the people that you think are the ones that are going to invest in you in the future. And start to develop a relationship with them before you ever need the money. They say, like when you have a terminal illness, if that's when you go to the doctor, it's too late. Right? In investing, similarly, thank God it's not terminal or anything like that, but start very early and develop relationships with investors who are going to be. The other thing is, since I don't know you, try to find somebody in your network who does know me, who can give you a trusted referral. Right? If Alex comes to me and says, listen, I have a company that's great for you, well, I'm going to pay attention to that. Right? But if somebody who I don't know comes to me and says that, then it's a different kind of referral. So I think the two best things you can do are start way early. Right? Get to know the investors you want long before you need them and start to develop relationships with them. And the other thing is find people who are in your network who know those people that you want to reach and ask them to introduce you.
That makes perfect sense. And I tend my observation is that most of the people in the VC industry, they either have been entrepreneurs themselves or are willing to be. That's why they're very much looking for creating a partnership with the company and with the startup rather than just deploying the capital, right? And this partnership, it requires some sort of trust, right? Some sense of equality in this partnership. It's almost like finding a co-founder rather than just getting a loan from the bank, right? But Egor, I mean, you have also such vast experience in IB and private equity. If you were creating a startup yourself, tomorrow, how would you go after researching all these people, identifying who are better fitted investor for you, who are maybe not that much? Can you please give us some practical guidance?
Yeah. Given this, that I'm now a later stage investor, it's less familiar for me. I'm in early stage, but there are some rules, of course. First of all, I wouldn't waste my time on looking for investors outside of my local community. I would say if I'm a Russian startup, I would never go to the US or to Israel for money. I mean, they're very polite, like Saul. They would smile at me. They would tell me I have a great product, great idea. They love this very much, but they will never give me a penny unless I show something in the local market. At least, I mean, if it's an early stage, I show some interest, some non-paying customers, etc. If it's a later stage, I must show them local revenue. That's first and foremost. Also, this networking that Saul were talking about, it's all about the process. So it isn't enough just to visit a couple of conferences and exchange business cards. So it's all about day-to-day local chatting with people. I talked to somebody about my idea, about my startup. This person talked to other person, and finally somebody will tell Saul that there is a guy, and his other contact will tell him also about this guy. And finally, I sent him an email, cold email. But Saul remembered that, wait a minute, somebody, my good friend of mine, just told me about this very company. Let's meet with them. I mean, let's have a cup of coffee tomorrow. And if I'm in Moscow and he's in Tel Aviv, it's possible, but very difficult. So, if he's in the valley, it's impossible. So, and that's why I would spend my time building this community locally.
That's very fair. Although I think maybe we shouldn't be over pessimistic in a sense that no foreign investor would ever invest in the Russian company, that kind of thing. Because also I think the people in the room, it's not that they have some idea on the napkin, right? And then they are going to the valley trying to run around people with a napkin, right? Most often people have some sort of a product and some traction, and I would completely agree that the first investor in your company should be a local person, because also if no local people are willing to invest, I mean, why somebody from abroad would give you the trust? But then I think the question for many people is, okay, I have a couple of angels or maybe a small fund. How to get it to the next level? How can I maybe open an office abroad? How may I appeal to those investors in Paris or in Israel, right? And create the spin of being not like entirely Russian company. What would be your advice on?
So it goes back to local. Let's say your company, as you suggested, you've raised a couple of angel rounds, you've got some good traction, and now you're starting to look for Series A. You want to get a little bit more global, you want to be a little bit more international. So instead of just looking locally, now you're starting to look globally, right? So that's a good idea. First of all, it's a good idea, right? You shouldn't not do it. Again, I think that fundraising in a startup is the hardest thing you're ever going to do, right? The number one customer and the number one investor. Those two are the hardest things that you have to, the two hardest hurdles you have to get over. Once you have those things, and now you're starting to get some traction, you have some money. So the question is, how do you attract investment at a later stage, not just locally, but internationally? It really depends. If you're looking for a lead investor outside of your local area, then you're going to have to change your local area. I just don't see how a lead investor in Tel Aviv is going to invest in a Russian company that is in Russia. The distance is way too hard. You have to keep in mind that when, again, I think I said it before, but when we make investments, we're looking at relationships. And the more I put into a company, especially at the early stage, the more I put into a company, the more relationship I want to have with that company. I'm going to be there. I want to visit them. I want to influence them. I want to help them. Right? One of the reasons that you want to find good investors are because of the ability that they have, the investor has, to help you grow your market, to help you grow your company. So if we're missing that connection, right, I'm not able to influence your success, which is ultimately my success, and you're not able to tap into my ability to help you. And unfortunately, that requires a certain proximity, right, in order to make it work. If I don't have that proximity, right, if you really want a Tel Aviv investor, right, for a Russian company, then what you need to do is find a Russian investor who has relationships with Tel Aviv investment houses so that they can reach out. If I, as a Russian VC, reach out to my colleagues and my friends in the VC community in different countries, and I say to them, listen, we have this great company, right? We're raising another round, and we'd like you to, we're giving you the opportunity to participate in it. That's very, very different from when the entrepreneur calls me up and says, listen, we're looking for funding, right? So either you have to be local and be part of a local ecosystem if you're in the early stage, or you have to find an investor who has connections to those other investors, and then they can help them. Again, that's part of the power of the investment, right? To bring those connections that help you grow your company. By bringing investors from other countries, you can help them grow the company in those countries, right? At the later stage, it's different, but I'll let Egor explain.
No, sure. Absolutely. Let me maybe just build on that, right? And I cannot agree more, right? I think, you know, if you are considering this sort of international path, right, and willing to attract the capital from abroad, I think the question you should ask the investor you meet, okay, so kind of connections in which, you know, place of the world you have, and what kind of the connections are there? How many investors do you know there? How many deals you made together? And I think there are kind of quite a strong kind of, you know, corridors for sure between, you know, Russia and Israel. Absolutely. I think Russia, you know, Moscow to Berlin, very much so. To London as well, maybe to a less extent. Of course, there is something, you know, between Moscow and the US. You know, there are several companies that have been sold, you know, to the players in the Valley. Maybe, you know, in the recent sort of political environment, a bit more challenging. But that's, Egor, I mean, something that you are dealing with on the daily basis, and your fund, you know, very much boasts the connections in the US. So what's your take on that?
You know, it's a little bit unusual, maybe, but when we speak to startups in the Valley, they never ask us about our Russian roots. It wasn't in even a single case. So I believe there is one explanation for this, because they have so many risks in their business. Then this political kind of risks for them is nothing. Maybe it could be sensible for the co-investors, other investors in these companies. But we never heard about it. I mean, that's not a problem. The problem we really have there is that we need to build this network locally. It's not only important for Starta, but also for a VC fund like ourselves. And of course, if we have now some roots in the Valley, even if we invest to some company in Russia, for this company, it would be easier to get there. Like Saul said, we are there like corridor, this bridge to the US. So that could be a possibility for us and for our company here. But we never tried. I mean, so it happened so. But why not?
I agree with you in a sense. There are maybe too much doom and gloom in the air, and in practicalities there are fewer obstacles, right? On the other hand, I can give a practical example of the Russian company who had, or maybe even has, the offer from one of the top public US players to buy it. But then they said, okay, but we're a public company, we need to go and check out your office as a part of the diligence, and this and that and so on. And then they realize, to go and check out the office, they need to fly to Washington, and get the visas. And that doesn't really work. And also they want to bring the whole R&D team outside of Russia and create the, give them the US visa type, whatever. And this is also very complicated. So eventually said, you know what? Maybe you relocate somewhere, in like the EU or Israel or whatever, and then we're going to sort of reconsider. This is, a very practical situation. Yeah. But maybe I would love really to give opportunity, for the audience to ask, questions. I'm sure there are many. If not, I also have many more from my side. But maybe just before we get into the questions, kind of 2 or 3 sort of practical, takeaways, right? How to go about, getting the top investor, from each of you.
Maybe start with early stage. So.
Go for it.
Early stage.
Early stage.
Just Mike, if you can.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was trying to think that. Okay. Early stage, practical ideas for how to raise money. Ultimately it comes down to what's the problem you're trying to solve? How big is it, right? What's the team? How much experience do you have? We ask a few other questions. Those are the ones that are really those are binary, right? Either it's a yes or a no, right? As soon as it's a no to any of those, then the answer is no altogether. So really good problem, really big market, really good team. Those are the first things that you really need that, without exception, they all have to be great. After that, strategy we can talk about, marketing we can talk about, cost of customer acquisition we can talk about. Those are things you can have discussions about. But if you're not solving a really big problem that has a big market and you don't have a good team, you're not going to get there. So focus on those things, and then the rest of it, figure out.
Thank you.
Yeah, and moving to a little bit later stage, of course we're digging more in real results, traction, unit economy, for sure. But still, the team, it's obviously the main part. And what makes a good team, from my perspective, there are kind of three points here. The first one is entrepreneurial experience, successful or not. Successful is better. The second thing is a relevant, background, relevant working experience. If you have a CTO working that was like a senior engineer in Google, and now you do something relevant to this into the startup, that makes a deal. I mean, that's good. And the third one is your educational background. The best teams, best startups has 2 or 3 co-founders with brilliant education. Dropouts is exception. So a lot, like 90+% of all unicorns were founded by 2 or 3 guys with a very good education from top league in the US that had several attempts to build a startup with 1 or 2 successes, and that had top investors attracted. And when you're attracting a top investor, as Saul mentioned, it's very important to find a proper lead, because lead will lead other investors, will attract them. Your main objective here is to find make networking, do networking locally, find a local strong lead that is trusted by other investors and by the market, which attract other investors, and then if you have at least one famous or top investor in your capital, the other will follow.
Yeah, and I guess two things, from my side, if I may. I mean, really to build on what Saul have said, because I have learned it, a hard way. I mean, through my career as well. First of all, I mean, I'm also getting, I don't know, like tens of or hundreds of emails, kind of cold suggesting, please, invest in us, consider the project, and so on. And I'm in general very sort of responsible person. I, tried in the old days to, answer each of them politely and so on. It's just impossible. I mean, the cold approach doesn't work at all. So really, I mean, try to find, a warm introduction, try, to get introduced, through a friend, and, try to make sure that, spend time with the person and there is enough, attention span to figure out, I mean, what you're about to say, what you are doing. And secondly, the investors are also people. And being not, very transactional, hey, I want to get, X amount of money for Y% of my company, it also helps. We are looking, for the partnership. We are looking, to find the people to work with. And, sometimes I remember, again, in the old days, I was trying to find the later stage investors for my early stage portfolio and saying, dude, I mean, you have invested in this company in Germany. It's exactly the same thing in Russia. And he's saying, yeah, but I have invested because I have studied with this guy for 15 years. And, no matter what he does, I'm going to invest in him. And, your Russian people, I don't know. So, and there are all sorts of other obscure reasons why people have invested in some stuff. So really, personal relationship, human relationship, and not sort of very transactional, we only like you for your money kind of thing. And on that note, I would love, to open time for questions. We still have quite some time. So maybe you can just raise the hand if you have, any question, and then we're going to pass around the mic. Would you help us with it?
What do you think about Russia as far as startups are concerned?
What do you think about Russia? What?
About Russia in general and its startups.
So I've been here several times now. It's probably my 5th or 6th trip to Russia in the last 2 years, and I like it a lot. Great city, big buildings. I think that the Russian ecosystem is very well developed. You have really brilliant engineers. The cost basis is very reasonable. It's actually quite inexpensive. The recent exposure in the last years to the outside world has brought things, innovation and new ideas to the kind of things that are being developed here, which is very good. So I think I like it a lot. I mean, I'm very taken by it, and I enjoy visiting. I think, just to add a piece to what I said before about success, the best thing that you can do is be a really successful company, right? The more traction that you have, the more revenue that you have, the more success you have, the easier it's going to be to attract investment from all around the world, right? But I think that one of the issues with Russian companies is that a lot of things that they do are very local, right? They don't take a global perspective initially, right? They think about, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way, right? You look at how to solve a local problem, and then you try to apply it to a global market, but not really understanding the global competitive landscape or what else is going on there and whether it really applies to other places. So I would be careful about that. But the best thing, if you want to be successful, and then you'll be more successful.
If I may, to add
sure, please.
A couple of words. Totally agree. And I would like to add that it's possibly a Russian market fallacy. It's because like startups think the market is big, and really it's big, but it's not big enough to build a really big story. That's a local fallacy. And when you have like a large part of the market, it's difficult to go global. So you should, companies from Israel, they initially think global because Israel market is small. It's like way smaller than the Russian market. And they don't have this fallacy.
Smaller than Moscow.
That's fantastic. I mean, how we all agree on this subject, because I suppose maybe 3 to 5 years ago, there would be a lot of discussions. Oh, I mean, let's build, next Avito and that kind of thing. But I completely agree. I think, being an entrepreneur in Russia is extremely hard. It was hard, it continues to be hard, but I think we're in a very fortunate, moment in time because our comparative advantage was never that strong. With, the ruble having depreciated, super low, cost of engineers, a lot of companies have created big talent pools. They know how to do stuff. You can get it from there. But then the only thing you need to do that is easier to say than to do is, to think globally, to build global product, to bring it to the global market, and then you can be extremely competitive. Maybe on that, note, trying to make it a positive note, I suggest we finish and give the round of applause to our speakers. Thank you, guys.